G'day and welcome back to the channel. So today's video is for anyone that is dealing with any form of shoulder weakness, shoulder pain, or even shoulder instability. And what I want to go through in this video is I want to show you a progression of an exercise that you might be able to do today that might help you reclaim some of that lost function that you might be looking for. And what I want to do in this video is I want to show you a series of progressions of one particular exercise that I use clinically that really seems to help my patients function and feel better relatively quickly. As you'll see in this video, the exercise progressions themselves are very simple and very respectful to any particular shoulder dysfunction. So as always, if you're unsure about any of these exercises, please take this video, show it to your health professional, get them to run through these exercises with you to make sure that they are physically appropriate for you at whatever stage of your rehabilitation you might be. But clinically, I find that these exercises are potentially more effective than some of the traditional exercises that we tend to do. Things like the banded shoulder strength exercises, like the rotator cuff exercises, the external rotation and the internal rotation variants, as well as a lot of the scapular exercises like the T's and the rows that we tend to do. This series of exercises may potentially be more significant for you depending on how they make you feel. And the reason for this is we're not going to look at your shoulder as individual muscles. We're not going to look at you as a rotator cuff or a supraspinatus, an infraspinatus, teres major, teres minor, a deltoid, scapular stabilizers like your rhomboids, your traps and things like that. The reason why I love these exercises so much is that they treat your shoulder as a whole. Because if you are someone who just works on isolated strength exercises in the gym or at home during your rehab, then you may be missing the context that allows those muscles to work together and improve your shoulder function. So let's get into these exercise progressions. So the first and most basic version of this exercise can be done with something as simple as a wall. All we're looking for you to do is to have your hands on the wall, and we're going to spend some time hanging out in this position, asking the musculature of our shoulders to work in unison. So while having some pressure and some tension on one hand, essentially what this asks us to do is it includes your rotator cuff, your scapular stabilizers, any of the muscles that communicate from your neck to your shoulder, from your shoulder to your upper back, from the shoulder to your chest. Any muscle that needs to activate to stop you from collapsing is activated in this position. And the basis of this exercise is that if you're in an up tall posture with your shoulders back and trying to create some external rotation through your arms by not turning your hands, but by planting your hand and externally rotating your elbows so that the point of the elbow is facing down or the crease of the elbow is facing up as high as you feel you can. From a shoulders back rotated position, all of a sudden hanging out here or spending time on one arm cues a lot of these muscles in to work together, and they do so in a way that traditional rotator cuff exercises and shoulder scapular exercises and I's and T's and A's and W's, whatever you might be doing for your shoulder rehab or your shoulder function, it takes the onus away from individual muscles that should be working together and provides them the context so that they can work together in unison. And again, clinically, I've found that my patients' rehab is so much richer, is so much more complete and potentially more effective by adding these types of exercises into the mix to encourage those tissues to work in the context that they're designed to work in the first place. But once you've found that you've mastered that, it may be too simple for you, but give it a go up against the wall to start with to get a sense of what the shoulders back external rotated position feels like, because as we get to these next progressions, it will start to get harder. Now, once you feel very comfortable and confident that you can do this shoulder stability exercise up against the wall, you can maintain great shoulder and scapular stability while you do this with little fatigue, then to make this harder, we want to start to progress you down to a more horizontal position to allow gravity to make things harder for you. And a great way to do that is by using a tabletop or a bench. Now, obviously, if you have a tabletop at home or a kitchen bench top, progress to that stage first before moving down to a lower position like a bench or on the edge of a chair or the edge of a bed. But again, choose the version of this exercise that you feel is challenging enough for you so that you can still maintain a great position but generate a ton of fatigue along the way. Again, what we're looking to do is the same concept, is that this time the position of your trunk and the position of your feet becomes a little bit more important. Now again, as we said before, we want to make sure that you're up nice and tall and have those shoulders back a little bit where you feel like your chest is dropping down a little bit in between those shoulders. Now, if you can have your feet together, it's a lot harder, but if you have your feet a little bit wider apart, potentially shoulder width apart, again, what we're trying to do here is to try and tap that left shoulder with your right hand and then tap that right shoulder with your left hand. Ultimately, again, the goal is to make sure that we're spending time in a good shoulder position, allowing our arms to take the load. And the little nuance here again is that when you place your shoulders back and sort of create that really nice flat scapular position, we also want to make sure that you're turning your elbows around so that the inside of the elbow is facing forwards. So being able to drop your shoulders back really helps engage a lot of the scapular stabilizers. By rotating your elbows around so that the crease is facing forwards, we're also engaging the rotator cuff muscles that a lot of those rotational exercises tend to target. But by doing all of this together and then maintaining that exact position while you do a shoulder tap, you should feel this hits a large amount of muscles that a lot of traditional strength exercises don't tend to generate. And again, if you can do the shoulder tap, if that's all you can manage, where you're spending 2 or 3 seconds with the tension through your shoulders each time, it is more beneficial if you can just hang out in this position and have constant tension through your arm, really trying to generate that fatigue and that shakiness. Now, if you can stay there for 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, it ultimately doesn't matter, because again, we need to meet you at the level that you're currently at. You absolutely do not deserve to experience any symptoms that you've been generating previously, whether it's some shoulder pain, feelings of instability or apprehension with your shoulder. As long as you're finding that with any of those symptoms, then this exercise is a completely safe and fantastically appropriate version for you. And then again, in the spirit of taking this down more horizontally, if you find doing it on a bench becomes too easy and you're ready for the next challenge, we can do the same thing, basically in a push-up position. So again, same rules apply. Shoulders back, so your chest drops through your shoulders. We want to make sure that you rotate and create some of that external rotation through your arms. Again, you might need to have your feet out a little bit wider here. We're going to do the same thing again when you want to make sure that we're getting some time spent on each position. Now, obviously, the more horizontal we become here, the more challenging it's going to be for your core muscles as well, which is fantastic because we want everything to sort of stabilize as much as possible. I'm starting to shake a little bit. But the main thing is I'm trying to maintain that good shoulder position, maintain that external rotated position as well, which makes the exercise a little bit harder again, but that's the point. And again, making sure that that is appropriate for you before moving on to the next progression as well. So once you've found that a purely horizontal push-up type position isn't necessarily a challenge for you anymore, we want to keep taking that progression to the next level. And while doing the shoulder stability exercise up against the wall, generally has our arms at about 90 degrees. When we're doing an incline version of this on a tabletop or a bench, again, we're not necessarily bypassing past this 90-degree shape. Now, this can be great to make sure that we're fostering that strength and the stability in a contextual kind of a way for everything below shoulder height. But we also need to make sure that we're improving the strength and the stability and the function of your shoulder in the second half of your range from about 90 degrees to that 180-degree range. Because again, if you only have shoulder stability and good shoulder function and strength below 90 degrees, then again, we can't promise that you're going to have the same level of comfort when your arm's above your head. And if you're someone who is prone to dislocating a shoulder or subluxing a shoulder or feeling vulnerable in those above shoulder ranges, so it makes sense that we can progress this exercise to complement that type of thinking as well. And a really simple way to keep progressing that is instead of having your hands up on something, we want to start to do a decline version of this exercise. But for the purposes of this, what we want to do again is we want to try and get your feet up on something stable, and then you might have to again pull your legs apart. Same deal, shoulders back, create that external rotation, and we want to do more of a shoulder tap position as well. And what you'll find here is that your hands are less in that sort of 90-degree shape and starting to come out past that 90 degrees and ultimately feeling a little bit more challenging, and my core's working overtime in this position, but spending some time in this position if it's too hard, trying to gravitate towards one side if you can, without letting your hips shift too much. Remember, we want to get your core muscles working at the same time, but same deal. Prioritizing the level that feels appropriate to you. You may get a red face. Make sure that you're breathing while you do this. But more importantly, we need to make sure that we're starting to challenge those higher ranges as well, to the point where you feel like you're starting to protect your shoulder in those ranges at the same time. And then from here, we want to start to make sure that the angle of your arms is getting steeper and steeper, to the point where we eventually want to do this in a handstand position up against a wall. But before we make it to the handstand shape, because going from this level to a handstand maybe is a step too far for some people, especially if you haven't done many handstands before. before. And especially if you feel like you have a lack of confidence in how stable or strong your shoulder is, we want to try and find a level in between that you can work through, so that then a handstand version of this feels ultimately logically the next step going forwards. And again, another way to do this, and I've had to take my jumper off for this because it's getting a lot harder, is we can get you to kneel up onto a table or a bench. Again, you can do this off the side of a bed if you want to, but we want to actually start to prioritize being in this position more than anything. Same deal, we want your shoulders back as best as possible. We want those elbows to rotate around, again, creating that stability at the joints. You might find that this position may not feel as physically challenging, but if you are someone who's had some shoulder dysfunction in the past, we want to do this in a very simple, safe way so that you can go to whatever level feels safe for you without ultimately taking a step too far in the forward in the other direction. And if you feel very confident with this, what you can then do is you can then come up into a more of a handstand type position, into this shape, even if your knees are bent, to really load up those shoulders in a way that you may not necessarily be comfortable doing previously. And then we can work towards a shoulder tap if that feels good for you, or just hang out in that position as best as possible. And then once you spend enough time doing that, we then want to take the next step to doing a handstand version of this. Because for me, the handstand version is something that I think everyone should at least aim towards progressing to really change the dynamics of how your shoulder functions and how it functions as a whole. So we're trying to squeeze as much out of this shoulder stability exercise as possible. A handstand up against a wall and a free handstand, which I can't do, are a great set of progressions to aim towards with this, because if you can do this in the variations that I'll try and show you in a second, then the amount of shoulder stability that this requires for you to do can often surpass what you may need to actually use day to day. So what we essentially want you to do is we want you to get your hands on the ground and then throw yourself up into a handstand position up against the wall. And that throwing up into the handstand position is really important, because that's why we go through the progressions up to this point, especially the awkward looking one before, where your feet are on a bench, your bum's right up in the air, you know, your shirt's coming up over your head. I had to take my jacket off because the hood was getting too annoying. But we want to graduate through those progressions so that when you throw yourself up against the wall, you have the shoulder mobility to get up there, but also the shoulder strength and the basic capacity to attempt this next version of the exercise. So essentially how this looks is we want to follow all the same basic principles that we did before, that making sure that your shoulders are back and you're trying to create that external rotation at the joint in this position. So basically how we're looking, you want to throw yourself up into the wall as best as you can. Now, again, just being here for a short amount of time, you will find that if your shoulders are back, you're creating that external rotation, and also making sure that you don't tilt your back too much. You want to make sure that you're as straight as you can be, squeeze your butt cheeks, draw in your belly, make sure that you're spending some time here. Now, this position alone for 10-15 seconds is quite challenging on your shoulders. If you have the capacity to though, we can get you to come across to one side. I need to throw my feet out to the side to sort of rebalance myself. You may be able to spend a few seconds just going from side to side on each hand and make sure that you can ramp up that exercise. Again, I find this quite challenging, but also what you can do is if you feel comfortable enough, you can try to walk your hands from side to side and then back again, just to make sure that you're throwing a little bit of a different stimulus across those shoulders as well. Now again, I don't know how graceful that looked, but hopefully you get the idea. I feel like it's absolutely something that I need to reintroduce back into my program to take my shoulder strength, stability, and function to the next level. But I've found that the traditional strength exercises, the individual isolated muscular strength exercises, still have a very valuable place in someone's rehab. But at some point, we need to make sure that while you're doing that, we also try and get those muscles to function together as a unit, because that's how they function in the real world when it matters. So once again, I genuinely hope that was helpful for you. I hope you learned a little bit. I hope you got something out of this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.